But yeah, it's been a minute. This is
Now I can
week.
put my chair back
I
up.
wish you would put 5 in quotes.
Because it's like week 10 chronologically. Yeah.
Did you change the date? Because the dates on there should tell us how long, right?
Yes. Well, I didn't change the dates for weeks 1 through 4. I've just updated the schedule going forward, so we can see it's a gap. It's a gap for sure. But yeah, so this is actually a really thematic week because we have fresh teams from this weekend to analyze. So notably, we're going to be looking at Cindy's team because obviously you picked the champion. And why it works for a team of 6 composition, why she picked some of the lines of 3 that she did, specifically the final match line of 3, has some really good synergies in it, and I'm really appreciative for it. So,
why don't we say that we slow rolled this specifically so that we had really great example of a team of 6 composition for us to talk about that everyone would be excited about. That's why it took so long.
You weren't in multiple different countries. You were available every Monday for sure.
Both of us were very available every Monday for the last
month. And I said, Ken, please wait. We need to wait for the perfect team waiting to be plucked from the tree.
Let's take a look at the schedule.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, it's been almost 2 months since our last one, by the way.
Yep. Yeah, that tracks with how busy everything's been. Yeah, so this week we're going to be looking at reading opponents' moves, which plays very much into the moveset selection from our previous scheduled lesson. Looking at your team of 6 composition for a 6-3 format, show 6, bring 3, or show 6, pick 3. And then line of 3 composition within that 6-3 format as well. For both of those, we will be looking at Vancouver because it is topical and easy to pull from.
And also if you are either after this lesson or sometime soon, if you have not already watched the Vancouver regionals, they should be available on the Pokemon Go Twitch channel for rewatch. I highly recommend watching them, especially after this if you haven't already, as you'll see a lot of these sort of principles applied at a very high level.
Yeah.
So, all right, you ready to get this lesson underway?
Yeah. So.
All right, let's do it.
So this is a repeat slide. This is from our last week that we did, but it's been a while. So we're looking at this now in the inverse in how you read an opposing team. So we'll see the next slide has on that. But in a lot of cases, moveset selection isn't really a skill you have to pay a ton of attention to because something like Skarmory, there's a straightforward answer. And Galarian Stunfisk, there's a straightforward answer. What moves are you running? It's what PvPoke says. Well, we just saw this weekend less common moveset selection in Ember, Kanto, Ninetales. So in some cases, you want something a little bit different, whether use Powder Snow or Charm on your Alolan Ninetales, or whether you want Dynamic Punch on your Medicham. For instance, or Power-Up Punch on your Medicham as well.
I was about to say, Medicham is a great example of this. We're just both fiends for Dynamic Punch, but you will see that depending on the way, especially for Vancouver, your team was comped, Medicham could be on any number of moves, but with most notably being a choice between Ice Punch and Power-Up Punch. And there were definitely a lot of matchups and a lot of situations where that choice was extremely important, not only as sort of determining what your Medicham can and can't do, but also when it comes to competitor knowledge. And if you knew, for example, your opponent's Medicham was not on Power-Up Punch, there were certain scenarios that you could play to. Or if you knew, for example, that they weren't on Ice Punch,
your Trevenant becomes...
Or your Sableye becomes much more powerful in that matchup. You can afford to take more damage on your Sableye before going into that matchup because they don't really threaten you.
Yeah, that's really big for specific Pokemon. And so if we go to the next slide, reading opponents' moves, which is going to be the same poster child, but a slightly different like focus. It's going to be a slightly different focus because you're trying to tease out what your opponent might run for this given meta, depending on whether or not they can TM between rounds, which for play Pokemon events, obviously you cannot. You write down your moves and your Pokemon at the beginning and you hand that off to a rep. So, especially in something that's televised, this skill can sometimes get neglected if you can figure out an opposing moveset. If you know your opponent's meta TM doesn't have Ice Punch, as we've mentioned. But the general way is to look at the meta, to look at an opponent's team, think what weaknesses or strengths are they trying to cover with a given Pokemon. Are they weaker to grass types? Then their Azumarill's probably on Ice Beam because they can't afford to be on Play Rough and Hydro Pump. Or are they really weak to Steel types? And in that case, Azumarill is most likely on Hydro Pump and either Ice Beam or Play Rough. Is their team weak to an opposing Azumarill? They probably have Play Rough. So questions like that, and then tournaments where you can use TMs, it's very likely that they're either comped as best as possible against you. So this is commonly seen in drafts. In ADL, you can TM between weeks, which is to some extent similar to between opponents. And then in Sylph's Factions format, you get to see opposing teams before you lock in your moves.
Right.
So there might be something where they want a surprise that might win them a game. Say you have Galarian Stunfisk and they have Walrein, and they say, well, I'm going to use Waterfall Walrein because you're going to assume that your Galarian Stunfisk beats my Walrein, and it's going to like turn the tables. And this is going to get me one win, and that's enough. Like sometimes in a best of 3 format, one win is enough.
Right.
And so that's like the other thing to keep in mind is like if there is merit to this other moveset, you should be considering it when approaching their team.
Right.
And these reads can then help you determine your playstyle. I see Neophobus in chat saying Hyper Beam Diggersby. Correct. So if you think that they might have Hyper Beam Diggersby, well, all of a sudden your Mana Buzz isn't as good of a counter.
Right.
But now your Sableye is a good counter because Fire Punches aren't as considerable damage as an Earthquake is.
Yeah.
And you have things like that. So Mew, again, poster child. If they're on Surf Wild Charge, you can play Grass pretty comfortably into it. Usually you can play Dragon pretty safe into a Mew regardless, because it's not frequent that they will be running Dragon Claw or Psyshock, despite the fact that I really like Psyshock on Mew. Most people don't tend to run it. So you usually see their Surf Wild Charge or the Double Charge moveset. And the Double Charge moveset obviously comes with other drawbacks. It's a little bit slower. A lot of the types that are weak to water will do better, like Ground is a lot better, because Flame Charge isn't the most powerful move.
Right.
It's just a rampy move. So being able to tease out a Mew moveset or any other Pokemon, even down to things like Toxicroak, which could be in some metas using Dynamic Punch, if there isn't a ton of merit to Sludge Bomb. Those are all reasons that this is a good skill to have, and it kind of comes back to that previous skill as well, is knowing what you would approach from your opponent's side helps you tease out what they might be bringing towards your side. We see this a lot with Mew. It's why I keep bringing up Mew. Is in Factions, I'm a manager for the Stadium Elite, and Arrow was bringing Mew almost every week in Ultra League last cycle, and would see an opponent with it as well and say, well, they need Grass Knot because I have Swampert, and they probably have Rock Slide because I have Walrein, or whatever it may be. And that kind of allows you to one, you get like down to 4 or 5 different moves, and then once they show certain ones, you know, oh, well, now I can bring this into it. It's a lot safer. And that's a skill to work towards. And I have some homework for that, so that's nice. But that's about all on reading opponents' moves. It's a relatively quick thing to go over because there's not really super in-depth you can go with it other than like a ton of examples. It's just something to keep in mind when you're viewing an opposing team.
Yeah, there's also something to be said that the meta game right now, especially in Open Great League is that there isn't a ton of diversity in moveset right now.
Yes.
Now there's obviously a few Pokemon that are seeing play that have pretty significant changes based on moveset. I would say we saw quite a few Alolan Ninetales in Vancouver, and that's one where the difference between Powder Snow and Charm is pretty significant. There are a few matchups where, like, something like a Trevenant, for example, it's not favored either way, but you are much happier if they're on Charm. Gives you a lot more wiggle room to play around. You're going to struggle immensely if they're on Powder Snow, where Walrein is kind of a little bit of the opposite, where you would much rather them not be charming you while they're resisting your your moves, right? So but for the most part, a lot of the Pokemon that are currently Metacham is really the only big one that we see that has a pretty diverse moveset. So it's something that as metagames change, it can become more or less important. But it is something to keep in mind that, you know, you want to keep in mind that your opponent may be doing something different, and it's where the knowledge that comes from repetition comes into play as you get more and more familiar with this Pokemon has essentially 3 viable movesets. Which one are they going to be on? And you can use the rest of their team sometimes to make that determination. Yeah,
a year and a half ago, when Hypno, I see Catherine mentioned in chat immediately, Hypno was more meta viable.
Yeah.
Deoxys Defense was more common as well. Azumarill was, I mean, not that Azumarill isn't viable now, but Azumarill was a lot more prevalent.
Right.
Than presently, where Walrein's kind of taken over as main water. And additionally, Alolan Marowak even has multiple viable movesets. And maybe we'll see that resurface a bit with the Shadow introduction. I think it's quite potent.
Yeah.
So some of those have kind of fallen by the wayside for things like Walrein, Trevenant, that have very straightforward movesets.
Right.
Registeel at this point. Skarmory is almost always on the triple flying moveset. And even Noctowl as well. You're not running Psychic on Noctowl at this point now that it has Shadow Ball, for instance.
Right.
But yeah, it's something to harness. It will swing back in terms of meta, depending on what things get shaken up. The next time we get to see move updates, and depending on what things get released.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, to jump into the rest of the lesson, the kind of meat is team of 6 composition. And whoa, what is this wonderful team of 6 that we see that won Vancouver's Masters regionals? So building a team of 6 is much more complex than 2 teams of 3. We went through teams of 3 last week: ABB, ABC, ABA. It doesn't have to be. You can often get a starting point from 2 different lines of 3. But I tend to recommend not that, because we're better than that. We can do better than just sticking Frankensteining 2 teams of 3 together and saying, it's alive.
So what you're saying is I shouldn't run Venusaur, Stunfisk, Sableye, Obstagoon, Alola, Cresselia. That's not my team?
I'm saying that could be a team, but taking a little bit of pause with it. Yeah, that sounds like it might have some Scrafty issues, maybe, which I'm notorious for, and
Scrafty's
get
not
into
real. It can't hurt you.
It's true. It's so uncommon. It's to the point where, like, it's always, kind of a meme when I build a team on stream, and how I approach a lot of team building cores is weak to fighting and then strong against fighting.
Yeah.
Well, 2 of the types that are strong against fighting are weak to Scrafty. That's ghosts and psychic types. So but Scrafty's so rare that I tend to just do well enough with a team anyway. You just top left when you see a Scrafty. But this is all to say that we can do better than that. That balancing a team of 6 involves many considerations, but in my opinion, if you're looking to win, comfort is the most important. You have to know your ins and outs of Pokemon, and that's why that was a focused lesson early on, is figure out how much moves do to your Pokemon. It's why you see me, I ran 105 battles with Tapu Fini yesterday. Every single battle that I played, I brought Tapu Fini. And I don't even know if I'm bringing Tapu Fini to a regional, but I know I'm going to see them. I know it's going to be on someone's team. I know that people are going to bring it to spook out someone who doesn't know how much damage it takes, how much damage it deals. That Surf does a surprising amount of damage, for instance. So knowing that is huge, and that's why I'm getting my reps in with it. We've gone over Team Builder in our first lesson with PV Poke. It's relatively straightforward on the website. You draft a team of 6, you can put in some settings around shadow Pokemon, and then it will show you your kind of threat profile. We've also gone over Comfort with Pokemon. This was, again, a focused lesson early on of you gotta know how much damage your moves are doing. And this is where those two kind of meet, is you create a strong team of 6 that you're comfortable with, and then factor in some criteria that we'll have in the next slide. But we see here at the bottom, I'm sure that Cindy had a lot of reps with Shadow Canine. It kind of tends to be the Pokemon that you expect to surprise people the most, you want to have a ton of reps with. So something like a Greedent, if I were to bring it, is kind of my ace in the hole because people don't have the reps in versus it. Things like Walrein Trev, I'm sure that she's played 1.5 million games against that core, and additionally with that core. So that's kind of a safer bread and butter. The Reggie core as well, pretty straightforward. If we want to go to the next slide, this is where it gets into a little more complex, is... Oh, did I skip? No, okay, so I didn't...
Are these...
Actually... No, I didn't change the text on this, but there's a third slide that does. The second slide's good because it shows a specific element to it.
Do you want this one?
No, the second one I want to show that matrix off. I just thought I had changed the text. That's still important. Yeah. This is still important. This is your team matrix, and this is something that I tend to do if I'm helping coach someone. This is what I did for Debbie Pebble as well. Is you have 6 Pokemon, they're going to pair together in complementary ways, and this is kind of a beauty behind Cindy's team, is you see Air/Mandibuzz pairs with every other Pokemon in some way or another. With Registeel, it protects against fighters and ground types in general, Air/Mandi does. With Trevenant, it protects against other ghosts, and additionally against Sableye in particular is the most notable. It also beats other dark types. So if they see a Scrafty, if they see a Umbreon, it protects Trevenant against those dark types. And then in turn, Trevenant tends to beat a lot of the big steals that would give an Air/Mandi issue. Kanto Ninetales protects Mandibuzz against Charm, which is really great because Mandibuzz doesn't like Charm, and additionally beats a lot of the steel types. Mandibuzz and Medicham share a weakness to Fairy and a Charm, but Mandibuzz beats Sableye, Mandibuzz beats Trevenant super hard, and tends to just protect Medicham well in that way. And then Walrein is similar to Registeel, where Mandibuzz protects it against fighting types, and additionally against grass types.
Right.
Not that grass is super prevalent in the meta. They would share a weakness to electric, but we're not really seeing electric types. We then see all of these other Pokemon have kind of anything that has a line between it is a good core duo. We don't see like Registeel and Walrein having a line because they share a weakness to fighting. And from here, you can develop lines of 3. So this is what I showed Debbie Pebble with her team, a little different. She had like Araquanid and Talonflame and Swampert, but it was, hey, if something is attached to 2 other Pokemon, you lead that one. If there's 3 that are connected, you can kind of suss out what your opponent has that's strong against that trio and comp it accordingly. So if we want to go to the next slide, this is the final team that she ran in that last game. She led Air/Mandibuzz and had Trevenant in the back along with Shadow Ninetales. So making lines of 3 from these lines of 6, how do you do it? Depends on your line of 6 and how specific things look. So Shadow Kanto Ninetales against Dial-Up Chung's team was really strong. There was no explicit counter, there was no Swampert, there was nothing, really pressuring that. So it could be either an extremely safe swap or a closer that she just knows is going to be good. Sometimes 2 shielding a Talonflame is your strat in the back because they don't have an explicit counter to Talonflame. So this 3 that she's got here all cover each other in certain ways. Trevenant covers Kanto Ninetales against water types, covers Mandibuzz against steel types in general, and rock types technically, but we don't really see those. Ninetales covers Mandibuzz against Charmers, covers Trevenant against other grasses, and a lot of the dark types just on merit of strength. And then I already discussed how Mandibuzz kind of covers those two. So, especially against Dialap's team, these three kind of worked in a way that she really executed well. So, Trevenant's only counter that really existed on her team was Sableye. Sableye was also one of the best neutral options against Kanto Ninetales. So we saw in that last game, final game, the third win, she led the Mandibuzz. She had Trevenant as a safe swap. And if Dialap didn't lead Sableye, which he did, and then she had alignment and won, pretty straightforward from there. But if he hadn't, she can swap in that Trevenant. Sableye comes in, she loses it, and then Mandibuzz can just farm down that Sableye. And then Kanto Ninetales with 2 shields, with Ember, really hard hitting, can close it out. So there's a lot of strategy behind teams of 3 composition. It's not even enough that can be fully summed up here. But what you're looking at with something like that is you are drawing things in, and then you are closing out with a strong third. This is seen a lot of the times with Charm. It's seen with something like a Talonflame. It can be seen with some of these ghost types that you know that they don't have a normal type, so you can just go straight Shadow Claw, Shadow Ball, and close it out. I actually did it quite a bit when I was running Kofagrigus in GBL before Trevenant was released. Was, okay, I'm going to run 2 things that complement each other well, and then Kofagrigus is just going to close it out. If they have a normal type, sucks. If they don't, free to reign.
Yeah.
This is a topic that I think deserves another lesson on, because it's a lot to go through all at once. Choosing your team of 3 from an opposing team of 6 and your own team of 6. But these matrices are really useful for seeing your team out and seeing where you can pull lines of 3 from. I think it's something that a lot of people tend not to do. A lot of it's already kind of in your brain when you have a team of 6. But a lot of these Pokemon have connections that you might not expect. You might not see, Mandibuzz and Alolan Ninetales, or not Alolan Ninetales, Kanto Ninetales as a duo, because something like Bastiodon will ruin them. Or a water type that had like a Blizzard Politoed would give them issue, or even just a Swampert might give them issue. But they do tend to complement each other when presented on a correct line of 6 against an opposing line of 6.
Yeah. There's also the fact that something like the Shadow Ninetales is not particularly favored against a neutral powerhouse fighter like the one we have in the meta. For example, you're generally going to lose to a Medicham with it. It's just not, you're not powerful enough, and they're just too much of a neutral monster. Well, guess what? Mandibuzz does cover that. And that's not to say that you need to protect your Kanto Ninetales from every fighter. It's just that many of the fighters in this particular meta beat your Shadow Ninetales. Therefore, having a flyer to protect it is a meta-dependent core that you maybe would not see on paper, but you would see the more and more that you play this format, that you might as well attribute your Kanto Ninetales as having a weakness to fighting, because it's not going to actually beat any of the fighters. So that trio specifically actually is very nice when you've sort of made the determination that your opponent is probably bringing the Medicham, because you have 2 ways to deal with that Pokemon when it's in play. The one other thing I was going to advise and give people a thought, and this is something that's maybe not totally covered here, but something that's really important when you are practicing. There's a reason why top level practice is show 6 practice. You don't just jam. I mean, you can also jam a bunch of games. And sometimes if you're looking to sort of find or see holes in a line of 3 that you think might be good, just saying, send whatever you want against my team. I'm just going to jam this 3. But tracking, for example, what your opponents are likely to do against your team of 6, you'll start to notice patterns. And one of the more fun things to do, and it's hard to do in Open greatly because the meta is so static, But in show 6 formats, you can frequently start to influence how your opponents are inclined to play with team selection. You can leave a perceived gap, knowing that your opponent will see it and try and capitalize on it. And you can sort of build a strategy beyond just, I see our two teams next to each other, what do I do? If you've been practicing and paying attention to what your opponents are doing, you may notice that every opponent that has a Scrafty has chosen to lead it against you in 150 practice battles. It might be worth building around. If you see an opponent with Scrafty, go, there's a good chance my opponent is going to lead this Pokemon. You don't want to commit everything to that plan, but you will start to see that, you know, and I think Dialab kind of did this by putting multiple ice types on his team. He influenced the way that people were choosing against him. And so, for example, he knew that Chaz would bring Talonflame because Talonflame looks way better against his team than it does against a number of other teams. And so you can start to make your opponent's team choices more predictable. And there's this sort of, that's where you get into sort of the next level stuff. One thing that I thought was really interesting that Cindy did circumstantially is she knew she was playing 2 best of 5s. Because if she lost, if you notice her first best of 5, she played the exact same line every game. She played the 3 Pokemon in different orders every single game. And basically made Dialab show his hand. What was he going to do against her team? What was his plans? And yes, she lost that first best of 5, but she learned a lot and revealed as little as possible. And as that next best of 5 started, you saw her make all of the adjustments. You saw her go, okay, I know what your plan is. Fine, I'll beat it. And force you to make your adjustments now mid sort of set 2. And you haven't seen how she plays, say, her Mandibuzz, right? You don't know. And so suddenly the dynamic has shifted entirely where she's learned a ton about what you're thinking. You've learned very little. And then she absolutely crushed that second best of 5 after adjusting. So there are other dynamics to this that come into play. That was obviously a very unique situation where there was potentially 2 best of 5s, but she played that first set very conservatively, knowing that the worst case scenario was they play again, and she learns move sets, she learns tendencies, she learns all of that. And I think that was a really underestimated sort of show of skill that I was just like, I saw like by the 4th game, I was like, she hasn't brought anything other than these 3 Mons. There's no way that she thinks that there's no other configuration here. And as soon as set 2 started and she brought an entirely different team, like, oh yeah, no, she's got it. She knows exactly what she's doing.
Gaming it,
and that's the sort of thing that you just don't see. And for example, there were plenty of opportunities in the tournament where players in game 1 would show a play pattern. And then repeat that play pattern in previous games. And if you identify, for example, Chaz actually did this. He believed, and in testing determined, that the best play pattern, like Sableye versus Walrein, was to throw return first. And he firmly believed it. And it's counterintuitive because everyone who shielded that return had a look on their face like, did you just throw a return at me? Not everyone shielded it though.
Exactly.
But if you had paid attention to his play pattern, he didn't deviate from that, right? He believed that was the correct line. And one of the things Chaz does is that Chaz believes something is the right line through testing, and he doesn't necessarily deviate from it. The line changes depending on what you do, but there are matchups where he believes there's a correct play pattern and he will play out to them. And you can learn that in early games, and you can also capitalize sometimes on that. I was surprised, for example, in some games too, where he didn't adjust that, where he'd thrown the return and the opponent hadn't respected it, and then the next game you're in your opponent's head, right? You're like, well, are they gonna do that again? And there's these sorts of dynamics there that really do come into play. That don't occur in a GBL battle. You don't know what your opponent's tendencies are unless you've played them before in GBL. And in this case, you can mix up your tendencies as well. Both with team comp. There was I can't remember which game it was, but I believe we had 2 leads in a row. It might have been Kevin Saludaras in day 2, where it was like two matchups in a row with identical leads, and it was a win for one player. And in the third game, the player who had lost both leads ran back the same lead a third time, and the other player did not think they would do that, and they caught a very favorable lead to win the match. And so you can't underestimate the amount of mind gaming that occurs in that, and your sort of a next level skill is starting to pay attention to that information and starting to utilize it. I will say, Alienara, if it's a struggle for you, the best thing you can do for yourself is simply say, I'm going to do this. And I know players who simply say, I am not going to change my lead for all 3 battles. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
If my opponent...
I hate those.
I do too, because I expect players to adjust. And when players just go, no. And they'll adjust their backline, but they're like, because like you get to that third game and you're like, they just led Sableye into me twice and lost both of them. Are they really gonna just lead Sableye again? And my mentality has always been, especially if I win game 1, I almost always, this is a tell, but I'm not competing this season. I am very much I beat you. Come at me. I'm running the exact same team in the exact same order, and I'm like, adjust.
Oh, I know.
Show me that you can beat me.
And I hate that. I played, when I played you in the past, I was like, ugh.
Because one, people are like, oh, well, they beat me, so they know that I'm going to adjust to try and beat that team. So they try and like next level the next level. And I'm just going, show me you can beat this. I determined, looking at your team, that this was the optimal way to play. Show me you can beat it. And I may sometimes adjust a backline mon if I find that I'm like, you know what, I think like you're gonna make this adjustment and I think this mon will be better in the back. But I'm almost certainly leading. I'm usually running 2 of the same 3, and I'm almost certainly leading the same Pokemon. And if you beat me, then I've run 2 games identically, and you have no idea what I'm gonna do game 3. And I've now seen 2 of your potential lines, and I can make an adjustment that's optimal against both. And and I just do that every single time. If I lose game 1, I tend to have like, so you build those for you. And what you say is, I just believe that this is a good way to play this. And you take a little bit of your own mind, because you don't want to mind game yourself, right? You don't want to next level yourself. So you just say, I'm going to make the read of your team, and I'm going to run it. If I win game 1, I'm going to make this adjustment. If I lose game 1, I'm going to make this adjustment, or I'm going to make no adjustment. And then on game 3, I'm going to do this. And that way you just sort of go, is it a little predictable? Yes, but not at the level that we play currently. If we get to the point where we're all playing a lot, like when local self tournaments were a thing, you started to learn that. Our friend Whisper leads the same Pokemon 3 times player. And I knew that because I played him so many times. I just didn't tell him. I knew that.
Yes.
Because it was a competitive advantage, right? But in factions, for example, when you start playing the same people a lot, you'll start to learn tendencies, and it can be really, really good to break tendencies when you're playing a known opponent repeatedly. So this is why, as a competitive format, this is fun, and why it has. It's truly something that's underrated about it, and one of the reasons why GBL, as much as I can enjoy it, sometimes it feels very frustrating to me.
Yeah, it gets that kind of evergreen enjoyment,
right?
For sure. But yeah, line of 3 composition. I actually realized if you go back one slide, the line of Team of 6 composition, that does have different text to it. For some reason, I thought it had repeated text.
No, just similar. The bullets are similar.
Yeah, the bullets are similar, but they're different. So the main things is with a team, and this is something that Chaz has talked to in the past, you want at least 2 clean wins versus everything in the meta. That's really hard to do. Like, notably, that's really hard to do. And we see even Cindy's team, like, she has Mandibuzz. Where's your other Sableye answer? May I ask you?
Realistically, it's probably Registeel at parity.
Or Shadow Walrein.
Or Ninetales kind of at parity, right? But even then, those matchups are all pretty dicey. But she has one brick wall. But here's the thing. in practice, you identify that your opponent is likely to always bring the Sableye, and you can sort of play with that knowledge. If you know, for example, your opponent is likely to, like Chaz did this really well. He kind of knew that Medicham was likely brought in against his team a lot of times. He played into some scenarios that were really counterintuitive, but they put a Sableye and Medicham at the end, and it didn't matter how many shields he had burned.
Yep, because Sableye's on the Medicham. Yep.
And in many cases, there were a couple games that I was like, I don't know how you are going to win this game from there. And I look at the two teams and go, well, there's a Sableye and a Medicham back there. Provided he puts those two Pokemon together, I think he wins this game. You get alignment
right.
Yep.
Yeah, that was I saw a lot in the like, oh, he's down 2 shields in the lead. It's like, doesn't matter, 1 lead.
Yeah, look at the other 2 Pokemon. He has a plan. It still has to execute it perfectly because there's not a lot of margin for error when you're down 2 shields, but when you have like really true close to brick walls, you're gonna be able to win some of those games as long as you identify what your opponent is likely doing.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like the 2 clean wins, it gets hard when you get to the top of the meta because it's like, well, what is a clean win against Registeel? Is Medicham even a clean win against Registeel? And the answer is like, not really. So like she has that right side, it's all kind of beats Registeel, Trev, K9 and Medicham, but it's still like not the cleanest of wins. And it's same with Sableye. Like this is, you want 2 things, ideally 3, and for something like Registeel, I'm going to make sure to have 3 on my team.
Right.
That you are comfortable winning in the even kind of matchup.
Yeah.
And this is something that PvPoke's Team Builder will naturally gravitate you towards if you are using that as a tool to devise your line of 6.
Yeah.
Comfort with your 6. What's up?
Does anything have a clean win versus Registeel these days?
Swampert is your best.
No, Golurk.
Of course, Golurk.
Golurk slaps it. Golurk absolutely decimates it.
Dynamic Punch Medicham is kind of my go-to.
Yeah, Dynamic Punch does, because like they're not gonna shield anything, but like Zap Cannon does like what, like 2/3 of your health.
You can't tank too, and that's why I say like, especially in Ice Punch and Psychic Medicham, it's not comfortable.
No,
it's not a fun matchup.
I generally did not like when I saw Medichams on Ice Punch this weekend. I think that there were opportunities, like there were a couple times where you managed to close off a Sableye with one or something, but generally speaking, you got it into like a steel matchup, and it didn't generate any momentum. And it was just like, what do you do? Like you have to go into a Registeel matchup at full parity and at full health, and it never felt good. I saw too many Medichams die to Registeels because they just couldn't close it.
I think it's interesting because I don't think there was enough Trevenant to warrant it, which is really weird to say of the current meta.
Right.
But they either weren't as popular or they just didn't show up as much. And I think it's partly because we've seen, and I haven't looked at the teams like mathematically, but we have seen an uptick in fire.
Right.
Even without this regional very heavily skewing that with a lot of Ninetales, we saw a lot of Talonflame at recent regionals. Talonflame's really upticked in popularity, and I think that scared off a good amount of Trevenant.
And there's
in
also
people's team building.
People may have also deviated because of the concern that there be more Marowaks. It's still a fairly fair matchup, but if they're on Fire Spin, like you just take a shadow Fire Spin whack, you take so much damage before you can do anything that and they're going to be able to force shields along the way too. So you just don't want to be there, right? They're similarly pacing you, and you're taking way more damage than they are because you're just squishier.
Exactly, and then Araquanid as well. Like it's a water type that you don't really love to see. Right. So I think that I agree with you that some heavier hitting Medicham sets might have been fun.
Yeah.
But yeah. So and then additionally, you want at least 3 cores. You can see on the matrix I've put together below. There's like 10 to 12 different cores that she can comp, and those all depend on what your opponent has, because a Mandibuzz and Medicham core, well, that's not a very straightforward core because you're so weak to a Charmer, but if your opponent doesn't have a Alolan Ninetales, or it doesn't have a Azumarill, you're pretty good. You're pretty well set.
Yeah.
So there's some of those adjustments. And then additional cores, like again, Cindy has a ton of cores potentially here. Those are all gravy as long as you know how to bundle together your team and make those lines of 3, like we just went into.
Nice.
But yeah. And then, again, we kind of already went over the line of 3 stuff. If nothing else, if no one else has questions in chat, we can get into the homework for this week.
Sure.
Which is on the lighter side from my end of putting things together, but a lot of intensity on your end, looking at a lot of your end being the student, looking at this recent weekend's teams, which I've graciously provided. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Hey, what's up, Anubis? We got a raid. Hello, friend. Thank you for the raid.
Hey,
how you doing? Welcome. We are doing a we're getting towards the end of a Pokemon Go Battle League. Actually, not even Go Battle League. This is Pokemon Go Trainer Battles. This is real competitive try-hard shit. But we're definitely doing a little learning session today. I really appreciate the raid, friend. Welcome in, raiders. And happy Monday. Appreciate it, friend.
Happy Monday.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the homework. Yes, there's homework.
Yes, there is homework.
How could we have lessons without homework?
Yeah, so the one that actually has some straightforward stuff, some attachment, there's an additional slide for it, is 3 different teams of 6 for Open Great League, very heavily influenced by this past weekend. Give me the movesets you would expect on the Pokemon that are in a red box. Each of them have some that are straightforward and some that aren't. One, don't overthink this because there's, like, for instance, Galvantula. I'm not expecting you to be like, oh, well, clearly they need Fury Cutter and Energy Ball, but I do want you to put thought into that for each Pokemon. And if it comes out to, like, its best coverage is probably its standard set, then go with its standard set. So those are 3 fun teams. The last one, even, all of those have diverse potential movesets, so that's a fun one. I was very excited to see Surfetched in Indianapolis have a lot of success, and then Beware this weekend, because that felt useful. But if we want to go back to the homework slide, then extra credit is giving you reasonings, because I want to know why you picked certain things. Second one, show me what you're bringing to regionals. Show me your
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Conflict of interest.
Hoff's like, tell me what team you're bringing to Columbus. I want to know.
Please show me what you're bringing to Columbus. I don't have any conflict of interest here. But what would you bring, hypothetically, to this tournament? I might steal it. I might steal this team. And then extra credit is why each of those picks, how do they work together? And then extra credit, make a matrix. And show me those cores. Show me why they work, how they do.
What's up, Telegraph? Speaking of Vancouver competitors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have, when we do the learning PvP sessions, there is, in fact, homework assignments. Real, honest-to-God homework.
I think it's the most useful part of it. Like,
it is.
Biased because I put them together, but there's only so much you can learn by watching. There's only so much I can explain. A lot of these concepts, the reason that you and I are really good at them, the reason that, Chaz, Cindy, Ilap, like any of the competitors from this past weekend are so skilled at them is because they've done it repeatedly. They've done it, the reps on it, and all of that. So it really does take the reps on it. This is week 5. Why are you saying which week is this?
I mean, it's week 9.
Oh.
Or 10.
Oh, no. Okay, I see. Yeah. So, don't mind Hoff's request? Yes. Show me a team that you would bring to playing the Open Great League, a team of 6. Why does it work together? Show me that matrix. Let me see how things core together. I want to see some impressive teams. And then you take that line of 6, and I want you to pick at random at least 3, but I've said 3, distinct top 8 or top 4 finishers from regional tournaments. It doesn't have to be Vancouver, but that's the one that I have readily available because AJ just wrote a wonderful article on them. But if you want to pick some from Perth, from Brazil, from Indianapolis, from any of the wonderful European regionals, you are very much welcome to do so. And then say what Pokemon you would lead and what lines of 3 you would make against these teams. And then extra credit is your reasoning and what you would field in the matchup. This is something I think a lot of people get hung up on, and we talked about with Chaz, is sometimes on a team you want to field your lead because you really want switch advantage. You want to get your Sableye on their meta champ. Other times, I was practicing with Left J before his tournament. Because I've been practicing with a lot of different friends, and I was leading Lickitung, and I was saying, I don't care what happens to Lickitung. I'm not going to use fields on it because Tapu Fini is really strong against Left J's team. And if I allot 2 fields for Tapu Fini, I can just have it in the back, and it has so much damage potential. That's the thing I really love about Tapu Fini, is it has so much both fast move and charge move pressure. And if I have 2 fields, if I keep it protected, it will run through his team because he doesn't have a hard answer. He doesn't have a Venusaur, doesn't have a Ferrothorn, nothing like that. So work through some of that with your lines of 3 and lines of 6, and if there's stuff that we need to go over, I will incorporate it into the next lesson. I do want to go over teams of 3 again, for sure. But those second and third points, there's no slides for them because it's very much do your own work on PV Poke or in looking through the regional teams.
Yeah, and this is all very good practice. You know, I think as we've said in previous lessons and as we've sort of reiterated over and over again, this is a great place to start. But at the end of the day, there's really no substitute for actually getting in app and battling with people with your teams. And for show 6 formats, there is definitely no substitute for finding a person who is either planning to compete in an event or has previously competed in an event and showing your 6 Pokemon and battling that person with what they think you would do. Because, and then talking to them after about what they thought about your team. Because you may think your opponent was thinking something, and unless you ask them what they thought and why they chose, you have no idea. So if you're like, oh, I assumed you would have brought, like, if you just think to yourself, I assumed they would have brought the Sableye. I guess they assumed, I assumed, and then you're like giving your opponent credit. They go, no, I didn't bring the Sableye because it loses to 6 of your Pokemon. Like, barely, it just loses all. You're like, wait, what? You just might have the wrong impression of what your opponent's reading. So, like, you have to, one, get comfortable with the idea. I mean, you remember the old days where you would have an evergreen screenshot of 6 Pokemon from your inventory with a nickname, right? That you just like, hey, you want a battle? Sure, send your 6, and you would shoot a screenshot of your 6 Pokemon named, you know, Nightmare or whatever.
Before tags.
Before tags, when it would ruin my living decks for a month while I was practicing for a tournament. But the fact was, you definitely have to practice against people in these style of formats, and you definitely need to talk to those people in addition to practicing with them to get a sense for what they actually saw on your team, right? It is.
It's one of the nice things is if you know people who you know won't be at an upcoming tournament. Like, for instance, I'm almost positive that Chaz isn't going to be competing in Ohio, so I might give him a ring.
He might be trying. He got a little bit of the taste of wanting, and he's got the fire a little bit. So I'm not saying it's impossible that he finds a way to compete. Right. That
would be fun. I would love to see him. I would love to take him down in the finals, of course.
Well, then you're both qualified too, so that's even better. That's the best part of being really in the true finals is like, I'm qualified. So at this point, I mean, it's nice to have the trip paid for, but like, you're still qualified. So.
But that is week 4.
5
and week 5. Correct. Week 5. You know the weeks better than I know.
What is time? What is time
anyway? That is week 5, and starting to get into the in-depths of the show 6 pick 3.